Right, I've had my tea and I've had my cake. Let's get into it. So, in this video, we're going to be breaking down my remake of Just Hold On, which is a track from Wilkinson and Subfocus, which was released on their Portals album that came out in October. I can describe the track as a breakbeat, house, electronic, hybrid tune. Not really heard anything like it before, which is probably why it caught my attention and why I wanted to remake it. If you know me, or if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I got into music production via remaking stuff. So I'd remake tunes from like animes, games, TV shows, you name it. Anything that I enjoyed, because one, you get to like re-listen, and it's quite fun to like re-listen to something you're making in the tune of something else. It's like you're covering it, but it's also good for a technical understanding of how they made the sounds, so you can use that experience towards another project. But just ultimately, it just expands your knowledge in terms of sound design. So it's a win-win. Anyway, let's get into it. Right, so the main synth of this project, the main synth sounds like this. So I made this using Synth, and the reason I did that was because before I've used a synth that sounded very reminiscent of the sound they use in their tune, and when I loaded up, I then realized it wasn't actually that close. So in the end, I just wiped the preset clean and just recreated it, and it was very simple to make anyway. It's just a sine wave, 4 voices with retrigger, and a saw wave with 4 voices and retrigger. And the attack is 0.05. The decay is 3.9, no sustain, and 2.2 release. And an important thing to note is that mono legato is switched on, and portamento is set to 9 milliseconds. These are like very important. When you listen to the original, you hear it swings from note to note. So definitely have that checked. There is some in-house effects going on. So distortion is set to overdrive type. The amount is just 2.7, just to add some harmonics. The chorus is 16%. It's just kind of giving some more space to the sound. The EQ is just doing a tiny bit of shaping. And the compression is not doing a lot, obviously, because I have OTT slapped on there anyway. Fab filter is just cutting off the low frequencies. I'm doing it at 260, which is quite a normal thing I do for a lot of sounds like synths. I always cut off around 250, 260, just because I don't want any more low-end stuff interfering with, say, mid basses and maybe sometimes snares and stuff like that. Saturn is driven to 40% on the default setting. OTT is driven to 16%, and everything else is set to default setting here. Dimension expander, giving some space or some width. More noticeable when you use that on a mono signal, like vocals. Fruity delay is set to 3, and that's just giving it that dit sound. I'm not sure how that translates into actual delay timing. There's a fab filter on the end of the effects chain, which is high passing at 314. I believe I did that because more harmonics were being introduced after using Saturn. And I also low passed it at 11,500 hertz because it sounded too clean, allowing those higher frequencies to come into the equation. And there's 2 bell curves here, dipped at 2.5, or just, yeah, almost 3 dB. Mainly just to tame some harmonics. And that would be that synth. There's another synth, which plays over here, which is a bit more simple. So the difference between this synth and the previous one is mainly the decay. I increased it just a slight bit. So this is now set to 6 rather than what it was before, like 3 point something. That's just so it could play the longer notes. That's pretty much it. Everything else, I believe, is the same. The effects chain on the mixer is slightly different because I added blood overdrive at 50% or 0.5. and I reduced the gain as well because obviously it makes it a lot louder. That is just to keep that sort of harmonic or the full harmonics as the note goes on. I felt like with the whatever I had before, it was losing that and becoming a bit too clean and thin towards the end of its notes as it played. So that was just to appease that. Synth 3 is also using the same Silent preset, my second one, because it also has long notes to play sometimes, which sounds like this. When you hear it like that, it sounds very chaotic, but when everything else is playing, you'll notice how it sounds very close. But the drawing it side is a bit different. So the secret with just drawing it in is literally just A-Bing it to the original. You have different size notes. Sometimes they don't even have like a fixed size. I'll just usually turn this to none. So the snapping is just to none. And just play it and see how it sounds compared to the original. It's a tedious task drawing all this in. And I think it repeats here. So I only had to do half of this, then copy it across. Once I sorted that out, synth number 2 was the easiest one because it's just repeating. And yeah, it's quite simple. Synth number 3 was the hardest one because it's very chaotic. However, they're making... Not chaotic, to an extent it is actually. Like, however they're making their sound is most likely with an analog synth. They're probably drawing in or having the synth play some very like simple notes, but then the sequencer is throwing it all around everywhere. So I'm trying to remake what the sequencer has made. So this is the best I got. I think I got really close though. Like I'm a perfectionist when it comes to this sort of stuff. So 95%, I think. Yeah, let's just say 95. Because someone's going to come back and be like, no, this is wrong. I'll be like, oh, God. Delete comment. So next up is the piano chords. So the piano chord is very basic. It's only a 2-note chord that plays throughout the entire track. Mostly the entire track. And all it's doing is an F and a D sharp, and then a G sharp and a C sharp. And it sounds like this. So this is made on Upright Felt Piano, which is a Kontakt plugin, or Kontakt library from Westwood. The reason I use this one is because I didn't want too much attack or more of a transient when the keys would be pressed, because they were quite subtle. So this Upright Felt Piano was perfect for this. That plays, as I said, throughout the entire track. There's not really much more to it than that. The processing on this, I do add OTT in again, and it's quite harsh. It's quite heavy. 47%, because without it, it's very quiet. I needed more. I wanted to hear the felt more. And then Fab Filter is also doing a high pass at the same 250. So that just cleans up down there. The only other synth part on this section is going to be the square synth, which is, there's not really much talking about that, to be honest, because it's just literally a square synth, which is playing. Not really worth talking about. There's no processing on this, and it was made on Silent, I believe. Yep, with a bit of reverb, and it's being routed to my delay send. So yeah, that's about it. That covers the synths. Right, so the second part is the pads. For the pads, I used Nexus. I often use Nexus for pads because they have really good banks. And you can kind of customize how they sound. Not on these ones because it's single layer pads, but in their Epic pads section, they'll have 3 to 4, which you can switch on and off over here and kind of customize it. But it's basically just a big sampler. This one's Ambient Pad 3, and the other one is Sine Pad 2. And together, that creates this. So it's pretty simple. It's just these notes that I kind of felt I was hearing during the song. This is being played by Ambient Pad 3. This one's being played by Sine Pad 2. That's just a long note that plays throughout the entire thing. It changes slightly. We add a really high harmonic, an A sharp. And that comes in when the drums when the full drums come in and the basses and stuff. But yeah, it sounds like this. I almost wanted it to sound like a sample. It's just very basic and it keeps on repeating. And I think I got there. So that's both pads are routed to one mixer, and OTT is doing quite a lot to just get as much volume out of it as possible to get that sort of. I don't want to have any attack. I just want it to all be there at once. This was doing a lot of that, and Fab Filter is just there to clean up the low ends. I don't want any lows in this. So 400 hertz high pass, adding some stereo using the stereo separation tool just on FL inbuilt one. You could use wider, or you could use isotope stereoizer, anything like that. Anything to get it wider. So that covers the pad. The next section will be the choirs. The choir section sounds like this. So, if you've ever played any old Japanese games, you might recognize that choir sound from those games. It's probably a very old way of making a certain synth or making that choir sound. But it just brings me back to when I played games like Tales of Symphonia or Tales of Vesperia, or maybe some Final Fantasy stuff as well. Even Dimension uses this kind of choir sound in his music sometimes. If you listen to Panzer, I think it is, you'll hear like a choir stab, and it sounds very close to that. So as soon as I heard this in their song, I was like, no way. I know where I've heard this before, and I knew where to find it. So I've used Nexus a fair amount of times when I started producing, and I kind of learned the insides out of it. Don't use it so much anymore, unless it's for pads. But I knew that this choir sound existed on there, and it's called PL Pizzicato Voice. How's like that? The other choir is, I don't know where I got it. It's somewhere in Nexus, but it's reset itself. But this is just a really long attack choir. So it's just playing. I'd say long attack and delay. Sorry, long attack and release. That's just to add some more texture as the choir plays, because you'll hear in the original there's something growing as it plays. There's not really much more to it. There's just processing to reduce to cut off the lows, and there's none on this one either, because it's not really having any lows in the first place. So yeah, that covers the choir. Let's move on to basses. There are three sections to the basses. There's the bass stab, there's the reese, and there's the sub. The sub I don't believe is that interesting, but I'll go over it anyway. So the bass stab sounds like this. So, pretty simple really. Serum is the first layer. It's just a saw and this weird squarey thing, I don't know what to call it. This is a 6.9 attack and an 87 decay, and a short release of 15 just to make sure that it doesn't actually click or pop or anything like that. There's not really much more going on. This unison is 8, just to give it some sort of width. And there's a bit of detuning as well. Yeah, also just to give it some more width, I suppose. Otherwise it sounds a bit too mono. There's not really much processing going on, just low passing, because you don't want it to sound like this, because it sounds odd and doesn't sound like the original. So I made it like this. Sounds a lot more sharp and clean. You don't actually want to hear the detuning when the high frequencies are in there, so just remove them entirely. Second layer, is Silent Nord Pluck. This is one of the sounds that I knew would just work because I've used this sound before. The special part, or the special thing about this sound is that it has this weird pitchiness on the attack, which is set down here on the envelope here. You can hear it more so on the higher notes. But I just knew that would work as a layer, so I added that in as well. That's just low pass here, and then just take a dip here to take out some of the. I think it just sounded a bit too. This sounds a bit more calm, just taming that area. You can probably notice that from both of those, there's no low pass. Sorry, there's no high pass. That's because the basses are rooted over here, which do have a high pass at 70. So next we have the third layer, a lot more subtle than the rest, and also a bit more stereoized than the rest as well. Just another layer, just to thicken it up a bit more. I couldn't really go much into detail with this. This is a preset called Chord Mouse 1. I believe it's from... What's the preset? No, it's from here somewhere. I'm not sure if you can see this. I think it's from Adam Van Baker's Silent Soundset Part 2. I think that's where all these are from. If you couldn't see that, I'm going to blame OBS because it's not seeing everything. So with those three layers, we have the Reese that is also played at the same time. So that sounds like this. So that is Spire. Since I actually got Spire, I've not had to really go anywhere else for my liquid drum and bass Reeses because this one's just perfect. It's just you can slap OTT on it to make it a bit more aggressive, or layer it with other Reeses, and you've got it. That's all you need. But this one is taking out so much because I just wanted that warmth, that body of the Reese rather than anything else. I don't want any sub. I don't want any high end of it, even though it doesn't really have any. Just making sure, because anything down here is going to be done with the sub anyway. So not really much to talk about on this one. This is a preset called BA Kung Fu. It's on the Factory 1 setting on Silent. So everyone should have it if you've got Silent. The sub, there's nothing really going on here. It's just being sidechained to the kick. So I won't go into detail with that, but I made that using 3x oscillator, which is a built-in FL Studio tool. It's the most simple plugin, and it just does what you need. So not really much more going on with that. It's just a sine wave. So we are on to drums. The drum section is probably going to be the longest and probably most complicated part of, or most in-depth rather, part of the tutorial or the breakdown. But also the most interesting, because drums is probably the most interesting part to do because it's a lot of building and layering. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this. Let's get into it. The kick itself, it's very weighty low end and like a crisp high end. That's why I thought it was perfect for this sound. Just has that sound. I don't know it just has a great sound about it. Didn't need any processing either, as you can see here, nothing. So it was perfect. It was like meant to be. The snare is made up of 4 layers. So we have the body, which is routed to here. It's got OTT, 56%, and everything else is normal except for the highs, which I boosted. It's got transient master, 24% on the attack. And it also has a low pass at 187 with some dips at 1,200 and 13,000, just to get rid of some boxiness and some other highs. The other snare, which is the high mids to sort of airy area, this one has just a EQ which is dipping the body of the original snare. So without that, you would actually hear the thump, of the actual snare, which I didn't want because the other snare is doing that for it. So that's just another layer. High passed at 165 and then boosted slightly at 2,400. The air is being made using the 3x oscillator FL plugin. that's just shaping the envelope here. So this is just shaping the sound. Very basic. I think Flight told me how to do this on one of his streams, and it's actually really effective. You can shape the sort of sound here with these two modulators, which will give you like a more low-endy sound, air, or high-end, however you want to. It just opens up the filter, really. That's all it's doing. You can kind of get a different sound from it that way. Now the main snare, which is this one I made on the day of making this remake, just has a, it just works. I think it was a layer of other snares, and it all just came together, and it was good. They're all rooted to this shuffle for some reason, though. And all this has is reducing sustain by 32%, and the EQ, which is taking away the lows. But that's about it. But there's not much more going on. That's just how the snare sounds, and altogether it should sound like this. So yeah, that covers the kick and snare. There's also the ghost drums, and there's the drum fill just before the drop part. So let's go through that. All right, ghost drums. So those are fairly simple. It's literally these two. So it's snare number 2, and there's also petit face snare 21. That's just layered together. They make the sound that we need. This is just a clone of this snare, just pitched up by 300 semitones, without anything else. And this one is just pitched up a slight bit, just to be harmonically in tune with the other snare. It's important to do that to make sure your snares are in tune, or in the same key if you're going to be layering them sometimes. You can do without doing that, but I chose this way. I don't believe there's any crazy processing on these. They're all going to this shuffle anyway. I don't know why it's called shuffle. It should be called break. Yep, that's the two there. You can hear them here. And right at the end, there's snare 3, which is doing a double snare. You can see that. And that just does you'll hear it. And the difference between that one to number 2 is that it's pitched up by 600 semitones instead of 300. And also there's a envelope which is making the attack longer by 5% on FL's own envelope editor. Just because the transients were a bit too sharp without this. But that covers that. Okay, the fill, drum fill. I think I used another petit face snare, yep, which is this. I put an envelope on it so it was just super short, and it was also pitched down slightly just to be more in tune with how the original sounds. And that's it. And it sounds like this. So yeah, very quick, snappy. So next we have the breaks. And the breaks are just loads of different layers of what I thought sounded right. So we have like a shuffle, some perk loop, some tops, more tops, more tops, more tops and breaks. So I'll go through them individually. So this is the shuffle. This is the perk loop. Sort of shakers. This is another top. This is some more, I think it's Lensman's pack actually, shadow play drums. That has a bit of like volume automation happening. I believe it's on the second kick that I wanted to cut that kick out. Yeah. There's a drum break. I don't know where this is from, but it's Fury. I think it's like a very old school sounding break, which I really loved, and just threw it in there because it had that feel to it. I think the snare on this break actually adds quite a bit to the original, the overall sound of the drums. And the last break, I got another pack somewhere. You can hear that's got a lot of low passing. Oh, sorry, yeah, low passing, and also LFO Tool is kind of doing its thing on that as well. Yeah. Sorry, high passing. Never mind. It's just a low quality or sounding like it doesn't have much highs in the first place. So all of these, they kind of have their own processing to an extent. A lot of OTT and transient masters, just reducing sustain where I need them. If I don't want them to sound too long. And high passing, shakers have nothing. Open hats have just high passing. Yeah, that's not much more to it, really. It was just playing around with... It was more sample choice and sample selection that kind of led to the more successful sound of this, making it sound better. There's also one I missed here, isn't there? What was this? Okay, that's addictive drums. That's this cymbal loop I made here, but I muted it because I bounced it out anyway. But yeah, that's just a cymbal loop going on here. Let me play that all together. Some of these instruments are being routed to the reverb send for the drums, which is just Valhalla Room. I use Valhalla Room for all my reverbs. I used to use something from... I can't remember. I'm not going to get into it. But I don't use it anymore because I need an iLock. What is it again? Slate Digital. I used to use one of their reverbs, but it was quite CPU intensive, and it wasn't worth like when I have a reverb on every different send for different instruments. So yeah, Valhalla's doing the job pretty well. So what's being routed to that is the snare, maybe? Let me check. This guy. So this shuffle is the one that's playing the is being routed to the reverb. Just to give it some more space, but overall. Right, that brings us to the end of the breakdown. I believe I've covered everything, but if I've missed anything out, just let me know in the comments of the video, and I'll get to them as soon as possible and try my best to answer them as best I can. Hope this has been interesting or helpful for either the people that asked for the tutorial in the first place, or just music enthusiasts who are interested in how sound design and drums are layered and made. It was quite fun to do. I'll do more in the future. Let me know if you want me to do a specific song, like a remake specific song, or if you want me to delve into one of my own original works, because that would also be interesting. These videos aren't too hard to make, and I've actually learned things along the way to make them easier on myself. So yeah, I can definitely expect some more in the future. I've left a SoundCloud link in the description linking to my remake, which is going to be better quality on SoundCloud instead of YouTube. So check that out if you want to listen to it there for the full thing. Yeah, and I'll catch you next time, guys. Peace.